back to this fellow Lenin, he had quite a lot of interesting things to say. When the Communist Party of Britain was formed, as you know, in 1920, they were fiercely anti-parliamentarian and fiercely anti the Labour Party. And not only did Lenin say that they should engage in parliamentary politics, but they should also seek to affiliate to the Labour Party, which they did consistently throughout the good times that you're talking about in the 1920s and 30s, right up until 1945. So, I mean, you're not following Lenin's line.
The unfortunate thing is that Lenin's advice was not only being listened to by the communists, it was also being listened to by the bourgeoisie and the Labour Party. The Labour Party acted on it in far greater intent than did the Communist Party. The Labour Party, when communists were advised to affiliate to the Labour Party, people only talk of affiliation, they don't talk of the conditions subject to which that affiliation was to be. They were to be able to go into the Labour Party and criticize the rotten leadership of the Labour Party and saying, you are social patriots, you are social traitors. Well, the Labour Party never gave them the opportunity to come and say that. Labour Party does not accept the affiliation of the Communist Party. After trying to marry somebody for 69 years, is it not time that you gave up the attempt?
Love affairs don't use marriage nowadays.
So it's not going to help, comrade. We've written on the subject. We've actually detailed the applications made on various occasions by the Communist Party to join the Labour Party. But Labour Party, very soon after Lenin's speech, stopped being the party that it was. It was not welcoming. Before that,
the early British Marxists certainly didn't think much of the Labour Party that you're talking about at that time.
Some did. Socialist Federation did. The Gallagher and Company did not. And there were a lot of differences, but they united to form a Communist Party, and they were united decision to do certain things. Those decisions could not be carried out because the people you wanted to marry wanted to have nothing to do with you.
It's more than that.
I think it's a wrong analogy. They didn't want to marry them. They wanted to
You've spoken a lot now. May I say something? The point of that whole policy of Lenin saying go and engage with the Labour Party was to go and expose it. He always characterised it as a bourgeois Labour Party, as politically a party of the bourgeoisie. He said, go and engage it, give it the support of rope gives a hanging man.
That's right.
You know? And therefore, that was a Labour Party that had never been in power, that had never been tested, that hadn't come in and bombed and invaded, Iraq the first time or the second time. That hadn't portrayed the working class at home and acted in the interest of imperialism abroad. That hadn't showed its true colours, so workers had genuine faith in it. The record of the Labour Party now speaks volumes for itself. It's not the same position, and you can't simply quote Lenin's line in the manner of quoting the Bible and say Lenin said support the Labour Party. It's again a question of material conditions. The way you're forming your argument, patchwork, hither and thither to justify, it seems to me, to justify support the Labour Party.
Read John McLean, read William Gallagher's statements of that period that
William Gallagher's not alive now to tell us. If he was alive now, I'm sure he wouldn't say support the Labour Party.
Their hatred of the Labour Party at that time knew no bounds. When John McLean contested elections, the only thing that he wanted to do was to put the Labour Party in third position. He didn't care if the Tories won.
Are you saying that we should support the Labour Party now?
I'm saying that the British route to socialism is the best possible vehicle right now, as presently at this time. I mean, what you're basically saying is contract out the struggle. Let's have a debate that goes on for the next 50 years. The shit kicked out of them, and we do nothing about it basically.
Hold on a minute.
I just wanted to make a suggestion. We had a party school once where I was asked to present on the subject of the British road to socialism. And I took a whole series of quotations from Lenin's State and Revolution and some whole series of quotations from the British Road to Socialism. I didn't put a name on either of them, and I distributed them. And people were left to draw their own conclusions. And they certainly saw a massive difference between Lenin's State and Revolution and the British Road to Socialism.
Of course there is.
So, you can't get away from the fact that bourgeois democracy is bourgeois democracy. You can have millions of people on the streets protesting against the war against Iraq, which there were. Does anybody take a blind bit of notice? They don't. So what is this democracy? It's not there. To the extent that any concessions have been made to the British working class, maybe the concessions have been channeled through Labour channels, but they've come from the bourgeoisie, and they've only come to the extent they're frightened of us. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, they're not frightened anymore, so they take everything away, you know. And they're not frightened of us because we've given up fighting for communism. Most people in the street haven't learned about communism at school, where they're told it's the same as fascism. The communists aren't telling them about communism. They're not telling them the basic things that they need to know in order to support the communist movement.
Yeah, that's right.
And all that matters is participating in an election. Actually, we have participated in elections. Well, I have anyway, because I've been a candidate for the Socialist Labour Party before the Socialist Labour Party threw me out. But I know that once you get involved in bourgeois elections, even though you know as a Marxist you're there in order to have a platform, in order to put forward communist ideas to people. That's why you're there. And you also ought to know that those ideas are new and novel and difficult and opposed by all the bourgeois media, and therefore to the extent you're putting them forward successfully, you must expect in the short term that you won't get a lot of votes. And yet the whole logic of participating in bourgeois elections, you're sitting there wanting to know how many votes you've got, how many, if you're any good you'll get votes, you see. And it actually pulls you in to a feeling, to forgetting why you're there. Now, I think communists have an obligation, if they can possibly do it, to participate in any electoral process, any chance to speak to the masses, any chance to let the masses speak to you, which I personally found the most valuable part of participating in elections. Of course you take it, but don't get sidetracked into thinking what's really important is to become a representative of bourgeois democracy.
Well, since in your campaigning in elections, what do you say to workers when the worker says to you, who do I vote for on this occasion? Who do you say, when the worker says to you, the SNP might be putting forward a referendum on independence, what do you say to the worker? Should he support it, or she support it, or should he or she oppose it? What concrete answers do you give to concrete questions?
Yeah, in the last election, our party took the line that you can vote for anybody that's against the war.
And the Tories will get in.
And let the Tories in.
They're not against the war.
What's the difference between
Tories and Labour?
In Scotland, the SNP will get in.
They're the same party, blue, red,
You might try and
colours
take the Tory
different.
party and get a lift wing of the Tory party and get socialism through the Tory
Come
party.
and talk to my neighbours who are at the bottom
What
of
are you
the
talking about? Neighbours, man. Don't tell them the wrong neighbours.
No, you see,
Unfortunately, when somebody is so deeply committed to supporting social democracy, there's not a point really having an argument. There's no argument that I could possibly put forward to convince his comrade that should be different. He's politically astute, he's politically wise, he's erudite, he knows the history of the communist movement, he knows the history of social democracy, but in the end he says, no, these are the traditional British Labour movement. We've always voted the Labour Party. Labour Party is an imperialist party, but it is our party. It's a bit like Reagan saying, yes, so-and-so is a son of a bitch, he's son of our bitch. You're saying Labour Party is a son of a bitch, but it's a son of our bitch. Well, if you want to carry on, that's fine, but that's not, okay, Kevin, see you. But it's not something that we're prepared to say. Yes, comrade. No, comrade. We're going to move on and take some other contributions.
Okay. For me, social democrat parties and labor parties are puppet or capitalist system, capitalist corrupt system. I don't know.